Now we continue in 1 Timothy chapter number 3, and I have made it down to concerning the deacon. We've made it down to verse number 12. Last week we saw the qualifications of the deacons' wives. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. I left the radio Friday dealing with this matter of faithful in all things. I think the matter of faithfulness in all things would have to be rooted in honesty and integrity. An individual that is not honest at their very core, at their root, at their very innermost being, an individual that is not honest is not going to be faithful. The faithfulness aspect is rooted in an area of honesty. Today we move forward concerning the deacons. Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife. And again, I think that is self-explanatory. It is interesting that this is identical to the qualification that is given to the bishop. The bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife. Paul states concerning the deacon, let the deacons be the husbands of one wife. Now, it is my opinion that a man that is not a husband is not qualified to be a bishop. And I would also find that a man that is not a husband, I would not find to be qualified to be a deacon. Now, I recognize that I can stir up some controversy at that particular point, but he says, let the deacons be the husbands of one wife. It doesn't say let the men who are deacons be married to one wife. Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife. There is an area of responsibility and maturity that comes to a man that is a husband, just like there's an area of maturity and development that comes to a woman that is a wife. And I'm not disparaging now. I have friends of mine that have never married, and lifelong. They've never married, but being a wife and then bearing children and rearing children has a very definite and I think a very positive effect upon a woman that an unmarried woman of the same age would never experience. I'm not slighting the unmarried women, but there is something about a woman that has fulfilled the responsibility of guiding the home, having a husband, and caring for that husband and guiding in the home. And then when she bears children and rears those children and has the responsibility of those children and the fellowship of those children as they grow into adulthood, and the relationship changes to that of fellowship and friendship and camaraderie. And you just have to have children and rear them to experience that. You can read a half a dozen books by psychologists, but until you've born children, for the ladies, and reared them to adulthood, you just never partaken of this. And so it is with a man. We make the comment from time to time that marriage has been good for so-and-so. A young fella gets married, and a year or so later, somebody comments marriage has been good for him. It certainly is good for a man not to be alone, but to marry, and involved in that marriage, he becomes the head of a home. Therefore, the responsibility of his wife and providing for his wife rests upon the man's shoulders. Now, I understand in our society today that we have women breadwinners and stay-at-home dads. But that is not the norm, historic norm of society. The man is to be the head of the house, and he is the head of the wife, like Christ is the head of the church. And he is, it's my opinion, that the man is to be the breadwinner and the leader and the guide of the home. The mother directs the home. She guides the home. The father is the head of the home and the provider and the breadwinner. And that teaches a man responsibility. That teaches a young man responsibility. When he marries a wife, and the responsibility of that wife now rests upon his shoulders, and he recognizes that he now has a home with all of its privileges, but with all of its responsibilities. And all of these privileges are also coupled to responsibilities. And then children begin to come along, and this young bachelor from 4 years ago is now a busy father and husband, and that has I think, a very positive effect upon a man. It has a sobering, a maturing effect. It will change a young boy into a man. It will make a boy into a man. Now, I think that this qualifies a man to understand certain things and to have regard for certain things that under other circumstances he would not have regard for. So the scripture says, let the deacons be the husbands of one wife. Now, if we have a problem with polygamy here, then that is a reflection on a moral problem. And there are some men that are not able to stay married. And if they're not able to stay married because of their personality, then we have a personality problem. And if they're not able to stay married because of infidelity, they have a moral problem. But they have a problem nonetheless. You show me a man or a woman that's been married 40 years, 50 years, and I will show you a man and a woman that meets every biblical criteria of being normal individuals, of being normal personalities. Those are the people that you want serving on your deacon board. Those are the people you want serving before the church. And one evidence of that is in relation to their marriage. Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife. Secondly, we find the same thing stated to the bishop, ruling their children and their own houses well. Now, there are two things here: ruling their own children and then ruling their own houses. Ruling their children and their own houses well. Now, I pointed this out with the bishop, but it bears repeating. It's repeated here. There were some that may not have been listening to the Bright Spot Hour when I dealt with this earlier. Paul says concerning the bishop, back in verse number 4, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity, with all seriousness. Ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection. Now the wording is slightly different, but I think the meaning is fundamentally the same. Ruling their children and their own houses well. This area of rulership is not that of despotic dictatorship. Paul is clear in warning the fathers not to provoke their children to wrath, but to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I think it's possible for fathers to become overbearing and to discourage their children, not only provoke their children to wrath, but discourage their children. One of the greatest sources of encouragement that can be given is when a father justly and rightly gives a good commendation to a son or a daughter, that the father would recognize and respect the ability, the understanding, the maturity of a son or a daughter. And our children are longing for our attention, and they are longing for our commendation. And I think that you and I ought to give that to our children. We ought to commend them. We ought to recognize what they've done. We ought to recognize their achievements and give them a word of commendation in these areas. That would be the opposite of provoking your children to wrath. Ruling gives the idea of managing the affairs, paying attention, being astute concerning what is going on. There are a lot of people that are just not paying attention. We use in the vernacular, they are asleep at the switch. They are not paying attention. The bills go unpaid. A bill gets slipped under a piece of paper, and 2 months later it's found when it's 2 months past due. A lot of fathers never see their children grow up. They're not there to rule their children because they're not there. That's the problem. They're not there. They're gone hunting, they're gone fishing, they're off with their buddies. And I recognize in the ministry that I've been gone a lot in my ministry. But I've been home more in 2020 than I've been home at any time in my life. And I kind of like being at home. The COVID situation has just wrecked all of my meetings this year. But I drove out and back and drive out and back out to 150 miles just so I can sleep in my bed at night so that I can be home part of the day through the week, even when I'm running meetings. And I've tried to do that to be fair with my wife and fair with my children, and for that matter, fair with myself. Ruling his children and their own house as well. And a father that is delinquent in the management of his house and the management of his bills and the management of all of the things that go along with the house. Simple repairs that need to be made, mowing the lawn. A man that would let the grass grow up knee-high in the yard because he's never home, that's a reflection on that man's lack of character. A man who wouldn't pick the trash up out of his front yard. A man that would let the paint peel off of his house and have his home in a general state of disarray and disorder. That's a reflection upon that individual. It's a reflection of what he is and a reflection of what he is not. And a man that can't manage in the affairs of his home is certainly not qualified, in my estimation, to manage the affairs of the church as a deacon serving on the deacon board. Now my time has gotten away from me. The Lord willing, I will continue in verse number 13 by the grace of God on tomorrow.
Write the Bright Spot Hour at Post Office Box 4, Greenville, South Carolina 296.